Executive Director of the Red Hook Initiative, a youth and community development organization, and has over 13 years of government experience working for the Mayor's Office and New York City Parks. She is on the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, nonprofit New York Board, and co-chairs the Parks and Open Space Partners Leadership Committee. Then we have Dwayne Martinez, is the director of the River Cities program at Scenic Hudson, a 61-year-strong environmental organization serving the Hudson Valley from Albany to Yonkers. The River Cities program works collaboratively on community-based plans that connect residents with nature in the 3 mid-Hudson cities of Kingston, Newburgh, and Poughkeepsie. Scenic Hudson works with residents, community leaders, community organizations, and government agencies to develop nature-based solutions to combat the nature gap and environmental injustices in cities. Martinez holds degrees in environmental design and city and regional planning from CU Boulder and Pratt Institute. Then we have Lucy Lawless, a former board member and current council member of the Olmsted Network. Lucy Lawless is a historical landscape architect and consultant who specializes in the work of the Olmsted firm. She worked in the private sector from 1979 to 1991 before joining the National Park Service as the first historical landscape architect for the Southeast region. She is a co-author of the Master List of Design Projects of the Olmsted firm, 1857 to 1979, and author of the Southern Garden History Society's first Magnolia essay, residential work of the Olmsted firm in Georgia, 1893 to 1937. With Liz Sargent, she is a co-author of Olmsted in Connecticut and is currently working on a cultural landscape report for Olmsted Junior's Forest Hills Gardens. Our first question today, we're going to explore these and other possible avenues of first concern is over 40 years ago, Central Park was the poster child of challenged parks, ridden with crime, suffering from a lack of investment, maintenance, and community engagement. Today, Central Park attracts more than 1 million visitors a year. We want to explore various models of engagement that can help revitalize city parks and areas around them. So, our first question is to Morgan and Monaco. And could you describe Prospect Park Alliance and the power of public-private partnerships? All the details.
Sure, yes, happy to. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marjorie Greville. I am the president of the Prospect Park Alliance and the park administrator. And the story of Prospect Park, similar to Central Park, it comes out of the fiscal crisis of the 70s, where the city really had abandoned its commitment to take care of the entire Parks Department. So our founder, many of whom you know, Tupper Thomas, my predecessor, was the first ever administrator of Prospect Park, and she was charged with this really important vision of creating an alliance. And the word alliance is really intentional to our founding story. It's really about allyship between the neighborhood, between local residents and the park, and about allyship between the alliance as a nonprofit organization and the city and the Parks Department. So our founding kind of vision has 3 core pillars. The first, Tupper strongly believed that we needed to restore the park, which had fallen into extreme disrepair and disarray. Cars were abandoned in the lake, crime was rampant. It was not a place that you wanted to be in after the sunset, or even around the streets that border the park. And it was her job to figure out how to really revitalize these historic structures. So we developed a capital program hired Christian Zimmerman, who's being honored tomorrow as our first landscape architect, who was responsible for helping to, leveraging the master plan of Olmsted, raise funding to revitalize our historic structures such as our boathouse, our nature center, view sheds, our long meadow, really make the park a destination and bring it back to the glory days of Olmsted's original vision and design. The second pillar is natural areas. We have 350 acres of natural areas, and Topper had the foresight to know that when there were budget cuts, when the city inevitably would cut back on its commitment to its park system, natural areas and urban forestry would be the first on the list to get cut. And she was right. So we, from the early days of our founding, created a long-term natural areas management plan and hired ecological zone gardener specialists who could help to really restore the urban forest and the 350 acres of natural areas. And then the third pillar of our work was really organized around community engagement, right? As I said, the word alliance is very intentional around the relationship that we have with the community that supports and uses the park. And so she created a volunteer program in addition to important public programs, environmental education programs, especially involving youth. We have a youth development program. And that was how we really revitalized the park from decades of disinvestment, because people cared about the park. They felt a sense of agency, they felt a sense of ownership. They had literally rolled up their sleeves to help take care of the park. And that those are the three ingredients to our success that we are now almost 40 years later. We celebrated our 40th anniversary in a couple of years, have grown from a group of volunteers and 3 staff members to 90 full-time staff at a budget of $15 million. So I think it was a very important vision around what are the core elements that would really bring the park back to life. And another just important component, which I know Olmsted cared deeply about as well, which was we are the Alliance, and there's a lot of work that we do and take on, but we, unlike the Central Park Conservancy, there's still a partnership with the Parks Department. So Central Park Conservancy today actually is 100% privately funded. There are no city employees that work in Central Park. We very much rely on the Parks Department for the day-to-day trash and facility maintenance. So we rely on the city budget and city employees to help care for the park, and that's an incredibly important component of how we see our work. It is that allyship and partnership with the city. The city is still obligated to care for its park system. Just because we're here, we add an incredible value, but it still comes back to the Parks Department, who has that responsibility to care for the day-to-day maintenance of the park.
Thank you, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you stressed that the city has the responsibility for taking care of the park. So next we'll go to Lucy Lawless, and we will get into historical designation. Some people raise concerns that historic designation limits the ability to do important things in the park. And what do you say when you hear that concern?
I think I was asked to speak to this because I work for the National Park Service, and as you probably all know, the National Register for Historic Places falls under the aegis of the National Park Service, as does National Historic Landmarks and the Historic American Landscape Survey. So the National Park Service is the keeper of the list, but in fact, the work is really done through your states. And it is so important to work with that group and your constituency to have that designation completed. And I would say I started the National Park Service in 1991, and all of this work that had begun in the late 70s, because of the falling apart of our places like Central Park, Prospect Park, this almost 100 years after what happened in these places, drove a whole sort of renaissance around historic landscapes. And for those of you who know the National Register, it is very architecturally driven. It still is by far and away the greatest number of listings in described without their settings. They're as if they stand alone on their pedestal without anything around them. And it really wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s that the Park Service caught up and said, we're missing this incredibly important component of historic significance, which is the landscape. And it wasn't until the 90s I was writing down that we got 2 National Register bulletins that would apply probably to most of you who were interested in nominating a landscape, which was the Rural Historic Districts, which was written by Jenny and the Kellers and Robert Melnick, that really described vernacular landscapes. And its kind of counterpart was Designed Historic Landscape, another National Register bulletin that wasn't completed until the 1990s. And then the other one I was thinking about that was an incredibly important one, because so many of our parks and landscapes fall within designed communities, suburbs, was the 2-part study by Linda McClellan on historic suburbs. But that one was done in 2002, so we're talking about 20 years of no additional advice to people who are interested in landscapes, and that those documents still stand the test for those of you who are interested in listening. But it wouldn't be until the 1990s that you read a National Register nomination that really fully describes the importance of the landscape to the architecture, let alone a landscape that is primarily important because of the landscape design. So if your National Register nomination is older than the 90s, I'd say it needs to be upgraded because the language isn't there to protect the things you're most interested in. The National Register doesn't count trees. It doesn't count historic views and vistas that are essential to understanding the place. And I was with wonderful slides of Downey Park. I can't wait to see it, that view from this high point of the Hudson River and that gap between the heights. I mean, those are the things that make landscapes landscapes. And the National Register really isn't, not that they aren't interested, but they don't understand how to make those countable features in the place. They can only count lengths of sidewalks and monuments put out there. So who writes these National Register nominations? It's essential that you have a diverse group. It's not just written by a historian, which is an important person to have on the team, but if you're really interested in the landscape, you would include historical landscape architects, environmentalists, who would really speak to all those values that are inherent to any important landscape. And so I thought it was also, just so you know, I mean, the National Register has its tiers of global significance, state significance, and national significance. And those are all important to understand as you sort of list things to those. But then there are also national historic landmarks, and I would wonder if something like Downey Park is worthy of a national historic landmark, because you can talk about when, you know, Frank was saying earlier, the thought that went behind the landscape movement in this country and how it comes together to remember Andrew Jackson Downey and his brother and the figures involved in that design. There's no place else like that in the country. And the National Historic Landmark nomination process is really to recognize those unique and one-of-a-kind places and to make sure we don't lose those important designs and sites to tell our whole landscape history. Because if there's anything distinct and maybe what's unique about this country is our recognition of landscape and landscape design. And so I'd say National Historic Landmark is another process to consider, because with it comes money. Unlike in states, there's money for National Register properties, but there are federal monies that go up and down that are available to National Historic Landmarks. They're not necessarily available to a property that's just listed in the register. And the other thing is the Historic American Landscape Survey. So if you're interested in this landscape of significance, whatever it is, to keep it, to document it in perpetuity, regardless of its integrity or even what's left. I'm thinking of those cemeteries that Sarah described are gone. Those are worthy of house documentation because, I wonder, because they go in the Library of Congress and will be remembered in a way that the register serves a different purpose. So I would put it to that.
There's another one I'd like to add in that bit about the cemeteries. Dwayne Higgins, please describe Scenic Hudson and the New Cities program. Use Poughkeepsie as an example and address why cities with limited resources can embrace opportunities for funding and expertise.
Sure, thanks. So Scenic Hudson is mostly known as a land trust, an environmental organization focus on nature and green in Hudson cities like Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, and Kingston as we go up the river. And one of the things that all of these cities share is that they're small cities with big city problems, and most of them are fiscally stressed in a way. And so one thing that we did in Poughkeepsie, where our home base is look at some city parks that were disinvested. There were decades, probably 40 years of deferred payments on 2 of these parks in the north side of Poughkeepsie. And Scenic Hudson worked with New City Parks, which is another nonprofit that is both park programming and renovation organization that looks at inner city parks that have been, fallen in the same pattern of disinvestment. So we work with the city and New City Parks for this sort of 3-way partnership to restore these 2 parks. And I just want to talk about the word renewal a little bit too, because it hits differently for different folks. And I think that some of the work that we do to enhance these parks that have been disinvested in is to reimagine them rather than to renew them or to renovate them, because culture changes all the time, and that being actually relevant to who's there now when the investment is happening 40 years later after the investment happened last. So Scenic Hudson is 2 organizations. There's Scenic Hudson Inc. and there's Scenic Hudson Land Trust. The Land Trust invested $500,000 to match the city's $500,000 in kind of work with landscape architecture and project management for new city parks. And so over the course of a couple of years, we worked with the city engineering, there's no parks department in the city of Poughkeepsie, and DPW takes care of everything in all the buildings. And so working with them to create a maintenance regime too for these parks, because when these were being renovated, the New York State Comptroller had designated the city of Poughkeepsie as the most fiscally stressed city in the state. And so how to if there's a shot in the arm of these parks for upgrades, what happens after they're, changed? And so there's this work 2 years after these renovations. They're beautiful. Our work is organized around the Fallkill Creek in Poughkeepsie, which is this natural asset that we're really trying to reinvigorate in the public mind too, because it has this industrial legacy. It's channelized for the whole city of Poughkeepsie. And Mountain Ranch Park is on thanks to Fallkill. And so how do we reconnect and re-envision nature in the cities while we're also providing these cultural and recreational amenities while bringing them up to speed for the day. So as an environmental organization that mostly works with large landscapes, this was all for us. And also this was the first time we worked directly with the city with municipal land. As a land trust, oftentimes we are protecting land or conserving land so that it's not developed. And so working in cities where the land is already developed and being conservation value deemed degraded in a way. And we're really looking to also bring the ecological function of these places up to meet the moment of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis too. So bringing all of that sort of environmental and ecological effort into park renovation in cities is really key too. So we're working alongside landscape architects, city administrators, and scientists and ecologists to really fill out the whole picture of what does it mean to renovate and reimagine parks and cities these days. And we're doing similar things in Newburgh too, just so folks know. There's a vision for a trail along Olmsted Creek, and community engagement, science, ecology, and technical assistance, both with community groups and municipalities, keeping all this work. There can't just be a community vision with resources, or an institutional vision without engagement, or municipality with no resources to get the job done. So it really takes community vision, resources, money, engineering, design, vision to pull it all together.
What about community input? Do you have talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do starts with community engagement. So Scenic Hudson really works as an partner with grassroots organizations and community leaders. So when we oftentimes we're responding to a vision that exists, within the community that can, use a little help, use a little resources. So we start with listening. We start with doing some ground truth of our own, just make sure that we understand the landscape, both physically, ecologically, socially, culturally, and then participation, design, co-creating designs from the get-go. And we're always looking at new methods of communicating. We realize that participatory design has been around for a while, but it's not about this transactional asks of like, hey, what color do you want this, or what game do you really like to play? Because, like I said, culture changing all the time. Communities and parks need to meet, who's there now and how to be lasting into the next generation. So it's always a mesh of, what works well that we know, and what's being brought to us, by the community moment. So we've always got to have our ear to the ground and be in conversation with the community.
Thank you. That was good. Now, would the audience like to ask questions? Do we have any questions? Or would you like us to keep talking?
I'm happy to share a bit more community engagement just from our perspective. So we have a community committee that is comprised of the major park user groups across the park, but also some of the major civic organizations in Brooklyn and our community. And the goal of the community committee is to really help advise us on our policies, give feedback on our plans and our programming, and really help us spread the word about the work that we're doing across these various constituencies. So that's a really valuable asset that we have to help guide our work. But then in addition, for our capital portfolio, all of the capital projects that we do, from a playground to restoring the entire lake, the 68 lake, we do a participatory design process where we engage with the community. So for example, with playgrounds, we'll set up shop in the playground directly with some boards and stickers, and have young people and their caregivers give us direct feedback on the elements that they currently like and things that they would like to see changed. And then, for larger projects like our Shirley Chisholm Welcome Center, it's really important for us to engage with communities who have already been in the business of storytelling and history, and who have vested interest in the project that we're engaged in, and collaborate co-host for design shreds and listening sessions to really engage feedback. And then it's not just about getting that feedback, but it's about sharing out the results and engaging people, as Joy was saying, inviting people to have a stake in stewardship. So not only is it beneficial to us to have a more diverse array of opinions that inform our planning, for our design work and for our programs, but then that helps with the stewardship conversation and engaging people to have a sense of ownership in the work once it's complete.
And that's so important because a lot of our public spaces become threatened for different reasons. I know because in Boston, our Franklin Park is under threat for development. And if you haven't put in place the community connections, it's very difficult to fight other strong, well-funded ideas about taking over parks for other reasons and not for the public park role that we feel is so important.
I think that segues so beautifully because that is the purpose of the National Register nomination, or any of those baseline research documents, is to really describe the design purposes of all areas of the park. And unfortunately, the public doesn't understand, a design park. They imagine these green open spaces to be sort of left over and not inherent to the original design. And so all of our parks were very thoughtfully considered, and as we saw in the example of Downey Park, there was a lot of thinking around to these areas of the park, where people would go, what they would experience. It's certainly lost over time because of lack of maintenance, lack of money, to the point that people don't understand that anymore. And without that research, without that description and history of a place, that new projects can be brought forward and placed in places that are completely inappropriate because everyone's lost the
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, so the question was about, is there an opportunity that we see in our work to engage young people in getting access and exposure to urban park management and ideally careers in that field? So I can say from Prospect Park's perspective, we have a long-standing youth development program which has kind of 2 tracks. The first is our Woodlands Youth Crew, so we work with high school students. They get paid for their labor to work alongside our landscape management team to actually care for our natural areas. And they're not doing just make nice work, raking leaves here and there. No, they are building trails. They are getting training in plant identification. They're battling with phragmites. They are really working alongside our ecological zone gardeners to learn about this trade and the work that we're engaged in. And with the goal of exposing them to the potential for, career opportunities. So I got my start as an 18-year-old intern when I was in high school, and now I'm the president of this organization. So it really is important to me that we're building that pipeline for young people, especially within, communities of color, BIPOC communities, for which, our field is not especially diverse across the leadership level, and it's really important that we are continuing to expose young people to careers in urban park management. And then the second track is our park youth representatives. It's our docent program. So we have a nature center and a historic house. And the high school students are engaged in sharing educational information in both of those settings. And along the lines of Sarah's work, we are very humbled to be reimagining our work at our Lefferts Historic House, which our exhibits have traditionally focused on the experience of the colonizer, the Lefferts family, what life was like for them. We have now been in the 2-year process of transforming our interpretive exhibits to be based on the perspective of the Lenape indigenous communities upon whose land Brookline rests. And we were fortunate to work with a historian who identified 25 individuals who were enslaved by the Lefferts family, and now have transformed our museum exhibits to focus on their lives, the stories of resilience, they built that farmland, they built that farmstead, and contributed to Brooklyne's economy. So the young people are getting exposure to, this new interpretive perspective, and we hope that that inspires them to sort of pursue careers in, education around the history of Brooklyn and its relationship to land and open space. So yes.
I'll double down on this. There's this adage that people won't care or steward or defend something that they don't love, and they can love something that they don't know. And so exposure is huge, and also is quality of experience. So exposure and experience are unique for folks in cities who may not have grown up with a relationship with going hiking or going to big parks or having this even historic perspective on landscapes. It takes a moment to get in there with folks, to expose, talk about experience, and it's so key. The other day we had a big fest here in New York to sort of build a relationship with Rosé Creek here in New York, because it's this key natural asset that folks don't have a relationship with. So when we're asking folks to be in the participatory design process, that's a start with exposure and experience and a care for it. And so that also is a generation of starting early, so that folks don't get hardened by some of the other influences that drive people's care for place or the environment, including the environment. So we do a lot of environmental in the parks that we're working in, just in the world too, so we can think of that. Also the science-based thinking and nature-based thinking, the curiosity, the joy that comes from it is just so key as well. We're working with New Directions, which is who's Bill Airport organization in Poughkeepsie, a lot of projects there, and one of them that we're starting is Urban Biodiversity Research Project. So we're working with Terry Institute and do studies to take crews that move out to put up camera traps, wildlife camera traps in the city, and audio equipment to check bats. And the protocols for using this equipment are pretty understandable for most folks. But again, just getting that rich quality experience that is so beautiful, and it's hard, it's worth the effort.
everybody else hear that? That was, she's talking about when, as time passes, the uses and the users of public spaces change. And how do we adjust to the different interest levels and needs that maybe the surrounding community express about their property land? Would you say that's she was much more eloquent than I did. But I thought that I would jump into that with Franklin Park because I feel it so strongly and I've been involved in that. And so the Emerald Necklace Conservancy is almost 25 years old now. And 20 years ago, it's been a two-stage process for them to become a really strong advocate for Franklin Park, which we need today. But this preparation from before has really made it possible for us to be the advocates today. And the first thing we did was start the Olmsted Tree Society, which was a management plan and a annual tree maintenance schedule. And we did that with our public partners. We're with the state of Boston, the town of Brookline, and the state Parks and Recreation Commission. And we started taking care of the trees. And that was a wonderful beginning because nobody who doesn't like trees. I mean, you want your trees to be healthy, you want them to be beautiful. And a lot of people aren't so aware of trees to bring it to their attention, but hardly anyone hates a tree once you do bring it to their attention. So that gave us a lot more gravitas as an organization that wanted to help this Olmsted Park in Boston, which was in the most perfect condition. And then we got the first threat to Franklin Park was that there's a hospital that 13 acres was taken from the park years ago. And the hospital was built in the 1950, 49-50, and it's now slated to be demolished. And the big discussion is what to do with these 13 acres. And of course, everybody in power wants to build on the 13 acres. And we're the organization that wanted the 13 acres to be back in the park. They were originally part of the park. So we started quite an interesting reach out to the community around the park to explain to them that this land really should be theirs. It was theirs originally. And wouldn't they like it back? And that was quite a process of trying to educate people about that they could ask for it, that it really was something that was part of their neighborhood originally. So we did that for a few years. That is still hanging out there. But then in the last year, we've got a new threat to Franklin Park, and that is some developers want to develop a schoolboy stadium that was developed on another 11-acre portion of the park in the 50s. And it's in disrepair. And we've got a private soccer group that wants to come in and make a big event stadium space. And when they do that, they're basically privatizing part of a very important public park. But it's a very important public park and a very, a social justice community, and it's been quite, we're now in the midst of a court case with the mayor to say that she can't do it, that she needs to follow the law, and there are laws about protecting public parks in Massachusetts. So it's been a interesting education for all of us. I think Karen would definitely talk about it better than I can. But it shows that building up that community presence and the community relationships has made a huge difference in this fight. I think if we didn't have some of our community participants who live in the neighborhood and talk about the park, it would have been totally a lost cause. I don't think we would have even had a hope. So you have to build your support groups, even though you don't know what the threat is going to be in the future. Okay, we got 2 questions now.
I think it's really important that we make an economic argument that these athletic fields, which are basically constructed fences, lighting, parking, bathrooms, that they don't belong on these historic urban parks. And that there's often plenty of abandoned land around them. And there, we're talking about public-private partnerships, but it's the athletic groups that ought to be trying to create the economy. Because when the parks were originally designed, there wasn't, like a baseball field, it was just some, a tiny corner. It wasn't, these are, it's a $1 trillion global industry, the sports industry. They don't belong on historic landscapes. And we need to start making that case that they can create the economy in the city. We have to move them off of the landscapes. And the landscapes are needed for the health and well-being of our people in the community and the planet biodiversity crisis. It's a very, it's a big serious problem. People want to accept that these athletic fields are athletic fields, and that's true. Are they in the right place? No. Marjorie?
Did everybody understand that question?
I think in this argument that we're having, that is specific to Renewal Park, it's generalized across this country in terms of common parks. And I'm now talking well beyond Olmsted. And what we see is that the communities that oftentimes surround those parks are Black and brown communities who have often never had citizen space, have never been engaged in conversation around development that would impact their neighborhoods. And what the Conservancy, and I'm simply using that because I've been on that board for a long time with Margie, we made an intentional decision. There's so often, forgive me if I'm admitting that, it is white folks who are writing those big checks. And we have said very intentionally as a Conservancy, we have to shift the dynamics of power. We have to make sure we are standing side by side with those neighbors, not in a vended manner that is pandering. We have to have legitimate power that is given to those neighborhoods and at the table for conversation and decision making. And given authority and input into that for true equity. And I think we are threatening power dynamics. Well, there's all sorts of parts of these serve that and how that athletic field or recreation facilities along on margins and invigorates neighborhoods and community. My point is, this is not just about athletics. This is to have genuine civic equity. And I think we all have a lot to lose. And our case is only one. We have terrible fear here. We see this as a huge domino effect. And so standing up to it, standing up to that power, actually making it quite real. And turning this into a conversation around justice. So we're not backing down, even though we may lose this battle. We're willing to take it all the way to the state Supreme Court because we recognize the racial inequity that is at the base of this.
Hold on a second, Morgan, to add to that.
Yeah, just going back to your question, which was around how do you actually kind of resolve community conflicts. One example that we have, somewhat related to the conversation you all were just having, is we were fortunate to get $40 million from the mayor's office to restore the northeast corner of the park known as the Vale. And this is the first time the Alliance has really touched that section of the park, long overdue, much needed. And there was a lot of pushback from the birding community, the Brooklyn Bird Club, and to some extent NYC Bird Alliance was really understandably concerned about this as a very treasured bird sanctuary, and that they did not want to have any alteration whatsoever. However, we know things that people rely on all parks for are public restrooms. And so one of the signature components of our capital project there was to install a much needed composting public restroom. And so that is an example of really balancing a number of different constituent needs and being mindful of course, the migratory bird patterns and habitat. We're building a pollinator meadow and very much recognize that we are part of a pollinator corridor between Greenwood Cemetery, the park, Fort Greene Park, and we also were approached by members of the LGBTQ community who were also upset that we were doing any changes to this section of the park because it has very important historical significance for that community as a gathering spot. So we had to contend with all of these different competing interests and make sure that our design and our plan was reflective of multiple uses. One of the ways that we're working with the LGBTQ community is to host programming and tours that talk about that history and include interpretive signage that does that as well. So it's really important that everybody comes to the table, feels heard, feels seen from their perspective, and that we can try as much as possible to accommodate through the power of really good design to accommodate some of those needs.
Thank you.
Has and walks and drive without the private sector, which is not the Olmsted vision. He imagined we would develop a government where all of our levels of government would afford the needed people more than anything else to care for these places. And you go from city to city, from community to community, and we're so lucky to have a Central Park and a Prospect Park as examples of places where there are people working, but we don't value the work that goes along the parks. We don't really value the maintenance workers and what they do and how they do it, because a park can't exist without them. So it's just something we need to think about. Who funds those people, those careers that need to be developed? The Olmsted, Fairstead, the National Service site, tell the Olmsted story, did a branching out program to train young, interested students in the arborist professions. We don't teach these anymore. Who would know what to do? A park exists on its own life cycle, so to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you to Lucy and Morgan. They're wonderful.
That's exactly the kind of conversation that we hope this conference will engender. I think as we've heard, cities across the country are feeling strapped for funds, which has put our parks in a very vulnerable spot. They're viewed as free land for building. This is not a unique problem. Olmsted was talking about it long ago, about parks and places which are really free of buildings. But we're seeing in city after city after city, as you have heard, this kind of threat where our public spaces, our open lands are being viewed as likely places for expansion and development because of private support. So this is going to be something that we want to continue to talk about. This is why the Olmsted Network exists. We know that there are isolated challenges in Boston and cities, but we need to elevate these challenges because this is a national threat to our public spaces and something that we have to worry about and care about and we'll continue to discuss in the course of this afternoon and tomorrow. With that, we will set you free to get a sandwich in the fellowship hall. Please do so as quickly as you can. Sit down and we will have a conversation with local partners, the Downing Park Conservancy and the Greater Newburgh Parks Conservancy, who will tell us about their work. We will meet with their environmental justice fellows and hear from them, and then we will continue the conversation with another panel after our lunch. So with that, thanks to everyone, and we'll move into lunch.